Joining me now is Jason B. Hirschhorn, has a lot of jobs, covers the NFL and also college football, but also a Packers-specific newsletter called The Leap. You can find it at theleap.substack.com. Did I get that right?
You absolutely did. Thank you.
Awesome. And that's Packers only, yeah, for the Packers fans that are watching?
It is Packers specific. So while we do dive into a lot of NFL topics and during the offseason some college football topics as it pertains to the draft, it is Packer-centric.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for joining me. I definitely want to talk about them today, and then I might just go around the league a little bit and even get your take with Georgia and Alabama meeting again in college football for the title there. But let's start with Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. A 13-3 season again. You have to give Matt LaFleur a lot of credit. I mean, to have 39 wins in 3 seasons, where does that rank in terms of impressive regular season totals for a head coach?
Well, purely in terms of win total, nobody has ever done that in their first 3 seasons, and no team in NFL history has gone 13 wins in back-to-back-to-back regular seasons. Now, there's context there, right? Like Matt LaFleur walked into a team that had a then 2-time MVP, is now a 3-time MVP, might soon be a 4-time MVP, but he is a big part of that process. The Packers were, over the previous 30-some games before LaFleur got there, around a 500 team. Now, some of those games did not involve Aaron Rodgers, but still, that was a team that wasn't performing at a Super Bowl contention level. LaFleur gets there. That first year, it was a 13-3 win season, but they didn't look like they were necessarily like top of the NFC at that time, but they were close. These last 2 seasons, they have been right there. LaFleur deserves a lot of credit for that, for the way that he's designed that offense, for the way he's gotten Aaron Rodgers to return to an MVP level. LaFleur is not the only piece. He's not the major piece for that team, obviously that being Rodgers himself, but he is a major component. The Packers are not at this stage without him.
I think we've all spent a lot of time, Jason, over the course of the last year trying to figure out what kind of guy Aaron Rodgers is. I mean, from everything with his vaccination status to outspoken he's been, I think some football fans are trying to get a sense of who he is. I mean, from what you know about him and about that offense, how much of Matt LaFleur's success has been dependent upon trying to figure out a way to reach Aaron Rodgers and get Aaron Rodgers to respond to him, his style, his offense in a way that has inspired him or motivated him, whereas he might have, I don't want to say checked out, but has been uninspired in the past before LaFleur's arrival?
Well, I think this is a larger conversation than just Aaron Rodgers. He was not the only player during those last few years of the Mike McCarthy era who appeared to be, as you put it, less than enthusiastic or maybe even checked out. So building and maintaining those relationships has been huge for LaFleur. I mean, if you go back to this offseason, the last time that we discussed this, Aaron Rodgers was someone who didn't maybe want to be a part of the Packers in 2021 or in the future. LaFleur's relationship was a big part of getting him to come back. So you cannot discount that part of it. LaFleur has done a lot of things in terms of who he selected for his coaching staff, how he's designed these game plans. It's not just the relationships, but you do have to talk about what an impact that has had on the Packers, because again, they are not a 13-win team again if LaFleur didn't find a way to get Rodgers to buy in.
Do you describe him as like a player's coach? I mean, is he deferential to Rodgers? How can you take us inside that relationship and kind of describe for those who are on the outside, what the dynamic is that exists there between LaFleur and the players that has led to this success?
Well, they describe him as a player's coach, so I don't think we really need to figure out what that is from the outside. Now, that doesn't mean that he's just doing what the players want him to do. Rodgers certainly has an input on what that offense looks like, and that has always been the case. LaFleur came in, and he said this at his introductory press conference, this is not going to be my offense. It's not going to be the offense that I ran with the Titans and then previously with the Rams. This is going to be the Packers offense. It's going to involve a lot of what I want to do. It's going to involve a lot of what the key offensive personnel wants to do, Rodgers being chief amongst those. So if you look at how that offense has formed over the 3 seasons in Green Bay, it does share a lot of similarities with what he did in his previous stops. It also shares some of what Rodgers has done well all his career. So it is something that's sort of become its own, even if you can see clearly where it's rooted. And I think that speaks to kind of what modern coaching is like. We saw this in Jacksonville. If you try to take an old school approach, it's very easy to lose the locker room, especially if your team is not winning. LaFleur has been able to buy the attention of the locker room by not necessarily just being deferential to his players, but listening to his players, incorporating that feedback in what they ultimately do. And the results at this point speak for themselves.
Yeah, I think we've seen an era of player empowerment in other leagues as well. And I wonder if that influence has maybe affected the modern day NFL and some of the relationship between head coaches and even entire coaching staffs and their personnel. So you've got the Packers locking up the top spot in the NFC over the weekend. What has Matt LaFleur said about his plan for week 18 in terms of resting the starters, but also keeping them fresh?
Well, it does sound like the key starters are going to play. The question is really, how much do they play? Rodgers at his postgame press conference, Davante Adams at his postgame press conference, and Matt LaFleur at his postgame press conference all said they were leaning towards playing. Now, that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to play all 4 quarters, though I suppose that is possible. Davante Adams in particular is right there with some team records. I think he's 20-some yards away from Jordy Nelson's all-time franchise record for receiving yards in a season. It seems like they want to get him that record and maybe a few others, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to play the whole game. I mean, Rodgers, while he says he's feeling a lot better from that broken toe, is still not 100%. They don't necessarily want to expose him to undue risk in a game that to them doesn't matter. They've already locked up the number 1 seed, as you said. It could also be a great opportunity for the Packers to showcase Jordan Love during at least part of that game. Jordan Love being the first-round pick from 2020. If Rodgers returns in 2022 and beyond, it is entirely possible that Jordan Love is not part of that team. He could be someone that is traded away. And Jordan Love going out with a bang would be very helpful to not just him personally, but to the team's long-term interest if they do intend to trade him.
Does he need that shot to get back out on the big stage? I mean, I don't want to say it was an embarrassing performance last time around, but, just for his continued development, like you say, I mean, how valuable would that be for Love to do that?
I don't think that he needs it in terms of if he doesn't get another opportunity in the 2021 season, now 2022 calendar year, to showcase what he can do, that his future is that of a backup quarterback or anything. But it would probably help his confidence. And it would certainly help the rest of the league see what he's capable of doing. In that first start against the Kansas City Chiefs, he had some moments where you could see why the Packers invested a first-round pick in him, but the overall results were not there. That could be the case again this week, for all we know, if Jordan Love does indeed play. But the Detroit Lions, one of the worst teams in the league, chances are Jordan Love, if he plays, will perform a lot better. So I don't think this is going to make or break Jordan Love, but if he performs well, especially given the very limited sample size that we have in terms of live game experience, it could go a long way towards increasing his trade value if the Packers do intend to move him.
So now, Jason, that the Packers have gotten to this point, I mean, the question kind of is in a lot of fans' minds, what happens now? What can they do with it? Another 13-3 season. Granted, there's another week of the regular season, but they've been in this position before. Aaron Rodgers, when you look at his trips to the NFC Championship, he's actually been there 5 times as a starter over the course of his career, but he's only won that game once, and that was 11 years ago. So, what to you tells you that this is going to have a different ending and a different result this time around than we haven't seen in years past?
Well, we have to apply some context to that NFC title game record. In most of those games, the Packers have entered as underdogs. So the Packers and Aaron Rodgers not emerging victorious isn't necessarily a surprise in those particular circumstances. Now, it was different this past season. They went in as favorites over Tampa Bay. And if they are in the NFC title game again this year, they will presumably do so as favorites. The difference this year relative to last year is that this Packers team has dealt with more injuries than they did in 2020 by far, and some health issues too, not necessarily injuries. And they really haven't missed a beat. The offensive line is dealing with only one of their preferred starters. Only one of those guys was a week 1 starter, a guy who they would have started in week 1 under any circumstance. And they really haven't missed too much on offense. It is one of the best offenses in the NFL. On defense, they've played largely without Jair Alexander, without Zadarius Smith, and at points in times other starters. And while it's not one of the best defenses in the league, it is a unit that is capable of creating turnovers. We've seen that certainly over the second half of the season, and one that's capable of, when it's playing with a lead, really dominating opponents. So when the Packers, or if the Packers get some of those starters back, David Bakhtiari, their all-pro left tackle, is practicing this week. Doesn't mean he's going to play this week, but it does remain a possibility that he returns later on this year. Jair Alexander, the all-pro corner, all-pro caliber corner, he's been practicing for several weeks. He could play this week, and if not, they still expect him to return at some point in the postseason. Zadarius Smith, a little more precarious there because he hasn't practiced yet, but if any of those guys come back, it's going to be a huge boost to a team that was already capable of winning the NFC's #1 seed in the playoffs. So this is a team that's performing as well as anyone in the conference and could get all of these field tilting pieces back. I think that's the way you look at it, is that they could be even better than we've seen. And right now they're the best team in the NFC.
So I guess then if you look at their chances in the conference championship this year, let's just say compared to the last few seasons, the last 2 consecutive seasons, what is your feel for whether or not they get those guys back, on whether they will be able to ultimately win that game and make it to the Super Bowl? I mean, are you saying that the health of those sort of key cornerstone pieces is ultimately going to dictate what happens in that game? Or do you feel like they have enough, even without those question marks, to do better than they have the last couple of seasons?
I think even if they don't get those guys back, they do have enough. And to a certain degree, that's a reflection of the rest of the NFC playoff field. You know, this year's Tampa Bay team, at least as it's entering the postseason, is not as good as the one that won the Super Bowl last year. Dallas is certainly dealing with issues, especially on offense. And the Rams and the Cardinals both have key flaws. The Packers have already beaten both of those teams. So I think in this particular field, the current version of the Packers is the best team. And then if they get any of those guys back, that could potentially add even more space between them. Doesn't mean, of course, that they are going to win those games, but there's a reason why the Packers, at least as they are currently constructed, are likely to be favored in any game they play during the NFC playoffs.
Let's go over to the AFC too, just while we have you, just because you cover the NFL in its totality. I mean, that's a little bit of a messier situation than what we have over in the NFC, with 6 of the 7 spots locked up. And you mentioned a couple of those other teams to keep an eye on. And there is some things that remain, in that conference this week to be played for. But in the AFC, what have been your takeaways? What were your takeaways from Week 17? Because it seems to be a muddier picture.
Yeah, it certainly is. And comparatively speaking, it is the lesser conference. They have a lot of teams that could not just reach the Super Bowl, obviously, but win the Super Bowl. But there is no superpower. The Chiefs, though they've looked at that at times this year, that defense can still be an issue for them. Their offense, obviously can be as good as any offense in the league when it's on its A game, but that hasn't happened roughly half the season. The Tennessee Titans currently have the #1 seed, and based on certain advanced metrics, they'd be the worst #1 overall seed in the AFC over the past several decades. So that alone should tell you a lot, right? That this is a conference that almost any team in the playoffs could come out of, but you don't feel great about any one of those teams individually. And some of that may change. The Titans could get back Derrick Henry. That would certainly tilt the field to their advantage. But is that going to be enough, right? Like the Chiefs, if they're on their A game, could still beat that Tennessee Titans team. The Buffalo Bills, though they have often played below their standard, might have the highest ceiling of any of these teams given who's still available. The Patriots, the best coach team in football year in, year out, but they have a rookie quarterback, and you have to factor that in. So I think it's the more interesting conference in terms of just the lack of certainty we have in terms of who could come out of it for the Super Bowl. And this might be the most exciting AFC playoff that we've seen in some time.
Because you mentioned Tampa not firing on all cylinders, maybe the way that they did a season ago, I am curious to get your take on what we saw with Antonio Brown. I mean, there's been a lot of things kind of floated about his mental health, but nobody's gotten specific. Tom Brady wished him the best, kind of took the high road. What is your take on what he's dealing with?
Well, that's kind of it, right? We don't really know what he is dealing with. We can only see what he's doing on the field, or in the case of what happened this past Sunday, on the side of the field. We want to be sensitive to mental health issues, but we also just don't know if that is exactly what he's dealing with. That could very easily be excuses being made by friends and colleagues of him. And from the outside, we really can't say with any certainty. It's almost dangerous to speculate. All we can say is that Tampa Bay Buccaneers team doesn't have a lot of the weapons it did last year, and Antonio Brown is now amongst those missing in action.
Is that the sort of thing that will provide a distraction moving forward into the postseason, or with the veterans that they have on their group and the way that they kind of quickly handled that situation, got rid of him on the team, that's something that they will likely have moved on from into this next week, or could something linger from that situation?
Well, you can't totally discount the possibility that it becomes a distraction that lingers into the postseason. This is also one of the oldest, most veteran teams in the NFL with one of the oldest, most veteran head coaches. I don't think that part of it is the concern. The concern is they now have an offense that doesn't feature two of their top wideouts, is missing their number one running back, at least at the moment, is missing several key players on defense. I think that's more the concern. The Antonio Brown off-field distractions, such as it is, I don't imagine is going to be that much of a narrative 2-3 weeks from now. But you never know with Antonio Brown. You never know with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So
just based on the NFC, and then I want to ask you one college football question before I let you go. Is anything less than a Super Bowl win based on the caliber of competition in the conference, and you said the AFC is a little bit more up for grabs, is anything less than a Super Bowl win for this Packers team this season going to be a disappointment?
I think it has to be. They've reached the NFC title game the last two seasons, and this past season they went in as the favorite. They had the home game. If they reach the NFC title game again this year, it will be at Lambeau Field again. At that point, I don't think you can view anything less than reaching the Super Bowl as anything but a disappointment, right? Like, that is the standard you have when you're dealing with the reigning MVP, the likely two-time or two in a row, four-time overall MVP, a team that has pretty much the second half of the season looked like the best team in not just the conference, but maybe all of football. I don't think anything less than that is a reasonable standard for them.
Is there any reason to think that Aaron Rodgers won't be the MVP this year?
If he plays in week 18, and again, it looks like he's going to do that, I guess it's possible that he has a poor performance and somebody else, maybe Joe Burrow, maybe Jonathan Taylor, just completely goes off and that swings a lot of votes. You know, the MVP award, more than any of the others, is a narrative-driven award and oftentimes the victim of recency bias. So there are ways in which Rodgers could not be the MVP, but as of right now, he is clearly the favorite, and it's going to be really hard for someone to knock him off that pedestal.
Is there any reason to think that the narrative around his vaccination status would swing some voters into maybe not giving him a vote that he's deserving of on the field?
It's certainly possible. You can't speak for any of the voters. There are 50 AP or people who vote for the AP MVP. Some of them may not view it as an issue at all. Some of them may view it as completely disqualifying. And we really don't know who's in what category. A lot of people might view it as maybe somewhat of a negative, but not disqualifying too. So it's really hard to say. I think that Rodgers is again up for the MVP kind of speaks to the field more than speaks to him. Rodgers is playing at an MVP level. I think that is absolutely fair to say. But voters usually don't give that award out to the same person twice in a row. And that Rodgers is in position to win that award in back-to-back seasons says that a lot of other players who might have been in contention for this award just really didn't put together MVP seasons. You know, Tom Brady was in that conversation for a while, and he's trailed off. The Bucs losing their track to the number one overall seed might have affected that. Jonathan Taylor certainly was a buzzy name for a while, but it's really hard for a non-quarterback to win that award. And as great as Jonathan Taylor has performed, it's really hard to argue that he's more valuable than multiple of the quarterbacks that are in contention for it. Joe Burrow maybe gets a little bit of interest down the stretch because the Bengals won that division. Not a lot of us expected them going into the year, and he individually has played extremely well. But it's really, really hard to say. He's had stretches of the season where, not that he was bad, but he wasn't playing at this level. So all things considered, Rodgers has put together the best season of anyone who's up for this award, and it probably is his to win.
And lastly, Jason, in college football, I know a lot of people were maybe disappointed to see a rematch of the SEC Championship in the title game just because of how disappointing that performance was, how uncompetitive, non-competitive it was. I mean, I watched it. I was bored by it. What's your reaction to Alabama and Georgia meeting again? And do you think that we have any reason to believe that that'll be a more competitive meeting this time around?
I think there's a lot of reasons to believe it'll be more competitive, but I'm more interested in the other part of this. We tend to see college football playoff semifinal blowouts. It's pretty rare when we don't get that, especially when we get those number 1, number 4 matchups. So to a certain degree, that's par for the course with the college football playoff. You may have no problem with it, you may have a huge problem with it, but that really is the reality of the 4-team playoff, at least through about a decade of this now. As for Georgia and Alabama, obviously the last time they met in the SEC title game, Alabama ran away with it, but this is a very flawed Alabama team by Alabama standards. It's definitely a team capable of winning the title. I don't want to dismiss that, but this is a huge step down on both sides of the ball from where they were a year ago, and particularly along the offensive line, a very big part of this game when you consider that the Georgia defensive front is one of the all-time great units, and that Georgia defense is one of the all-time great college football defenses. Now, that Georgia offense, when it has to play from behind, does not look as good. Hasn't really had to play from behind a lot. The SEC title game was one of the rare exceptions. If Georgia can get off to an early lead, which they have done a great job of the vast, vast majority of this season, there's every reason to believe that not only can they, make the game interesting, that maybe they could even pull away from Alabama. They're capable of doing that. I think if you look over the course of the whole season, not just that 1 week sample size of the SEC title game, that Georgia has been the better team. Now, we will find out in just a matter of days, right? Whether that is a situation where, for one reason or another, Alabama just matches up with them extremely well. But Georgia absolutely can make this interesting. I'm looking forward to watching it myself.
All right, Jason, thanks very much. Once again, that's theleap.substack.com. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. Thank you again, Carolyn.
Packers news there. Best of luck to you in the postseason. And again, hopefully we can talk to you in just a couple weeks. Thanks for being with us.